Yes, so we are right now also on YouTube Live. I shared with you, Frank, in the chat. So, okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, then I think we can start with the...
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, hello Flutter developers, and welcome to this special live stream today. So the first topic, as you can see, we have is building apps with Flutter. So basically, we have Frank with us, who will talk about Firebase. Yeah. So welcome to this masterclass live stream, Frank.
Hey there, everyone.
Yeah. So basically, we are having a Q&A session where we will be covering so many invaluable tips like that can potentially help you elevate your Flutter development skills with Firebase, and all the things like you'll learn how to make your apps better with Firebase, what kind of features you can implement using Firebase, all the things you'll see. So, all right. So, without further ado, let's move to our, the first question. We have already seen, like, we have Frank. So, yeah, the first question we have is, what are the best practices to follow when using Firebase with Flutter?
Wow, we're starting broad. I like that. And especially, I'd like it that we do that at the start of a masterclass. Firebase is a pretty broad platform, I would say, right? We've been around since 2012, but part of Google since 2014. So we're going on 10 years at Google, and Firebase is a platform of backend services, right? So you write your Flutter app, but apps become more fun if you have multiple users in the app. Firebase has a set of services for that, right? And so we have an online database that you can access directly from your Flutter code. And we have an authentication service that you use for sign-in. We have like file storage, right? So that you can share images with each other. And like there's tons more features, right? Press reporting, dynamic linking, app check, which sure that abuse gets definitely reduced. We can't prevent it completely, but there's tons of these types of services. And the best practice, of course, depend on the service, right? I wish I could give you one thing. Honestly, the one thing I can probably give you is read our documentation and our guidance, right? We have like lots of explanations of how to implement the service correctly. And for example, right, we have a checklist that has like, it's a checklist, right? Like it has bullet points of things you should do before you publish the app. And there's a pretty decent chance that a lot of like people who have Firebase apps in the production never followed the checklist. And it's like, doesn't mean you did it wrong, but the chances of doing it right become a lot better if you follow the checklist, right? And that's the sort of thing that I would recommend people doing.
Yeah. So we'll also, I guess, share.
Go ahead, Kamlesh.
Yeah, so we'll also share, I guess, these checklist, the link of this checklist, so that you guys can see like what are these checklists and what kind of things we should follow before publishing our app. So yeah, that's about these points. Now let's move to...
Right? Is this the correct one?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, then we share this link to everyone.
Yeah. So yeah, we should, I guess, move to our second question. So yeah, you have already like gave the overview, but still like, okay, what are the core Firebase services commonly used in Flutter app development, and how they contribute like in different aspects of functionality? For example, push notification you talk about, app check, Firebase functions, cloud functions, all the things.
I did not mention two of those three, actually, so good point. Now, the most common one that people know best, by the way, is our online database. If you're using it in the masterclass, it's probably going to be Firestore. That's a great database. And Firestore, right, it's an online database that you access directly from your app. And that means you don't have to spin up a server for most interactions that your users do. And that makes a big difference to your app development time. So that's a great place to get started. To be able to secure the data, you typically want to know who your user is, so you sign them in. So you use Firebase authentication for that. That means that you can associate the data in your database with a specific user, right? So that only that user can do. Let's say if we're building a chat app, which I think, well, you're building a chatbot, but if we're building a chat app, right, you want everyone to be able to read all the chat messages, but you probably only want the person who sent the message to be able to modify or delete it, that type of interaction. So you already said about push notifications, great one. Firebase Cloud Messaging is the product we use for that. And just to give you an idea, even I actually wonder, Kamalesh, do you want to take a guess how many messages Firebase Cloud Messaging sends per second?
Yeah, as like the Firebase is really old enough, like 10 years, I would say maybe probably millions.
Yeah, it's in fact, it's now 18 million messages per second. Firebase Cloud Messaging is our actually oldest product. It predates Firebase. It used to be called Google Cloud Messaging. And we started it when we started Android. And it's 15 years old now. I'm not sure if we published that, but just internally celebrating. So, our peak load actually was during the World Cup soccer last year, or at least the peak load that I know of. And we sent 48 million messages per second in the World Cup final. So that was amazing. Yeah, these are amazing numbers. And just so you know, not every one of these shows up as a push notification. Actually, the majority doesn't. But for example, I did video on this where I like to, when it's a game where the Netherlands, where I'm from originally plays in, I like to pin the score on my Android phone's home screen. And all those updates are also sent through Firebase Cloud Messaging. So, but 48 million QPS, even at Google, that's a high number. That's a number where people are like, what? So, and you said Cloud Functions, and Cloud Functions is a great example of how to do a serverless backend, right? Serverless used to be a hype word a few years ago. Now, luckily, people accept it. But Cloud Functions are a way that you can run your code on my server, is what I always joke. The easiest way to do this is in response to things that happen in your application. So most people are used to, right, where you have an API endpoint, HTTP URL that you can call from your application code. But with Cloud Functions, honestly, the more recommended pattern is actually to make everything respond to things that happen. So if we think of chat messages, for example, right, you can run some code when somebody sends a chat message. For example, to call Cloud Messaging to send a push notification if the other user left the app, right? And that's a very common thing to do with Cloud Functions. They're short, like it's not necessarily short code, but they're typically short-lived invocations, and then they happen in the background. It's almost like the content of your app comes alive. So, but there's many. Right, we have app quality products. We have products that help you like essentially promote your app. Remote config is sort of, I always call it the sleeper hit of Firebase, because it's a product that we had at Google before we made it a public product. Because at Google we have a rule that says that you can't ship a feature while you also ship code. So which sounds very odd. It's like, how do you ship a feature if you can't ship the code? But we actually ship the code without the feature enabled, and then we have what we call remote config now, a dashboard where we said, okay, the code doesn't cause problems right now. Let's enable it for people, and that's remote config. And we have all kinds of rollout scenarios for that. So honestly, it's a quite extensive platform.
Yeah. There are so many services. So guys, you can also check Firebase. So there are so many services. So yeah, that's about this question. And yeah, that's incredible, by the way, the knowledge you have shared. So let's move to the third question. The third question we have, what are the best practices for structuring the Firebase projects and organizing data with Firestore to optimize performance, scalability, and security? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. It's also a very broad question, though. So for Firestore, honestly, we're just some friends here, right? I can be real. Like, a lot of people start with Firebase because we have a free tier, right? And I'll be completely honest about that. And that doesn't mean they necessarily wanted a NoSQL database, but they end up with a NoSQL database, right? And then you get all these things of like, how do I do joins? And if you haven't used Firestore, here's a shocker. You can't. We don't join your data. One of the reasons that NoSQL databases scale so well is that they optimize, they essentially only offer operations that they can scale, that they can do with a certain performance level, and that means essentially that they should require very, very little CPU on the server. That's pretty much what it is, right? And so Firestore doesn't do joins. It actually until last year couldn't do OR queries. It still now is limited in the types of queries it can do. But we have something really cool coming out next week for that. Keep an eye out for that. But so you need to organize your data differently than if you come from a background in relational databases and SQL. And for example, I often tell people that it's best to think of what you see on the screen of your app and roughly replicate that in your database. So if you have a list of chat messages in your app, then have a list of chat messages in your database. But if you have a home screen, let's say that you have a news app where you show on your home screen 5 categories of news and 5 headlines for each article, then you could read 20, so Firestore is document-based, right? So you could read 25 documents, one for each news article. You could also make a document that represents the homepage and has 25 headlines. Then you need to update that document a lot more, but every user only has to read one. And this is sort of the trade-off that you always have to do with NoSQL databases. We have some great guidance on this, so always start on our documentation. But I also recommend, there's a video series. It's a bit old now, but it explains it really well. It's called Get to Know Cloud Firestore. But honestly, I, at some point, took a vanity URL for it because it's that good. I didn't make it. And it's called firestore.video. So if you go to that one, it's a bit of a long playlist. I really think, though, that if you follow that one, you're going to learn a lot about the trade-offs. The trade-offs are different for every app. That's also why when I answer a lot of questions on Stack Overflow and from developers, and I try to help them, but often it's like I have this domain, right? A restaurant review thing, right? What's the best data model? And you can't answer that for a NoSQL database because the best data model is literally different for the use cases of your app. So you need to look at every use case, and often you need to change your data model for many of the use cases, usually because the database doesn't have the feature that you thought you needed, right? So you need to model your data slightly different to be able to implement it. That's not because our database is like incomplete. It's a honestly quite complete NoSQL database by now. It's literally because we need to guarantee the performance. The one thing I want to say, I should probably have started with this one, is like Firestore has a unique performance guarantee that you don't find in most databases. In fact, I don't think I found it, which is, the internal saying is just horrible. I'll use better words, but essentially, let's say that you want to grab the last 100 documents from a collection. So a collection is like our grouping, and a document is a single item of data. And let's say that reading 100 documents takes 5 seconds today. It's not a great number, but like it doesn't really matter. And let's say that today you have actually 100,000 documents. So you're taking the most recent 100 out of 100,000. It takes 5 seconds. Then we say that 5 seconds is guaranteed. So even if you have 1 million documents or 1 billion documents, it will take 5 seconds to get those latest 100, which is a quite unique guarantee. That also means that after you've done some basic like development and the first like few users are on board, you essentially know your performance for the lifetime of your app. Long answer. We're not going to get through the entire list.
Yeah, we have like a long list of questions, but yeah, maybe we can skip some of the questions. So yeah, let's move to the another question. Yeah, another question we have: what challenges might Flutter developers face when integrating Firebase? How they can troubleshoot and resolve them?
There's always going to be many questions. Fun fact: I discovered Firebase back in 2012, 2013 maybe. 2012 actually, 2012. I was one of the first beta users. I liked the technology. I started playing with it. Then I saw that people were starting to ask questions on Stack Overflow, so I answered them. And I didn't work for Firebase at the time. And then at some point they reached out and said, "We like that you're answering questions. Do you want to come work for us?" So I found my job helping developers troubleshoot Firebase or discover data modeling issues. And I mentioned this because asking people for help on Stack Overflow is a really good way to get help. It can also be a very frustrating way to get help. Don't get me wrong. I know about all the troubles people might have there. I still recommend, though, asking in a public forum. Just follow the rules of the forum there. A common problem, honestly, it's getting stuff working initially. It's one of my bigger problems, I must admit. We have great tooling these days to make that easier. It's also making sure that the product works for the platform that you want to support. So Flutter works on more platforms than Firebase works, for example. So you want to make sure that it's available there. And then there's lots of integration issues. I see people having lots of build issues. And for example, I'm not the best person to help with those. I'm very much more focused on coding, but lots of the actually more experienced Flutter engineers on our teams are much more experienced and helping there. Try to do your own basic troubleshooting. If you can't figure it out, ask somebody who has more experience in. If they're not sitting close to you, a public forum is a good place to do that. But be sure to give them what we call a minimal reproduction. So show them what you've done and show them the error you get so that they can actually see the problem that you have. And of course, search for the error message that you get, by the way. You'd be surprised how many people forget to do that. When they've posted their question, I essentially copy the error message into a Google search, and the first link I get is actually what they need to do. Right? And that's not because they're dumb developers. They're not. It's literally they typically type the title of the question last, and by that time, their mind is trained to actually summarize the problem well. So after you type the question, do one more search, you might find the answer.
Okay. Nowadays, people use ChatGPT.
That's for sure too. Oh, please use Gemini. No.
Gemini, it's free.
That's true. Also, it's ChatGPT indeed. And honestly, we're also using such tools, of course, ourselves. For us, a bit Gemini more, and it's a great tool to use. I must admit, the code advice I get is typically not what I want, but configuration type questions, these tools are for me even really helpful. I notice, right, because they give me a set of things to consider, right, and that's really useful. I like that. Okay. Let's cherry pick from the. I think 12 more questions. What random number question do you still want me to add?
7th question. Let's go to the 7th question.
Oh, I like that. It's about monetization. Oh, no, wait. Oh, this one.
What security measures?
Okay. Oh, you picked a good week for this one, Kamlesh. All the security measures. I need to be careful here. My legal counsel might be sitting in. No, just kidding there. But you can see me thinking because I need to pick my words because I want to make sure you have the best chance of having a successful app and not having trouble. With Firebase, you get a database that you can access directly from your Flutter app, which is amazing. But it's also a responsibility, right? Because it also means that if you can access it from your Flutter app, that means that the configuration data of your database must be in that Flutter app. That means that any malicious user can find the configuration data and use that to somehow connect to your database. Now, we give you a programming language to secure access to your database. So you need to, when you implement your use cases in your Flutter app, you need to make sure that you also implement those in your security rules. Essentially, what I've been telling people, and believe me, I've told a lot of Googlers that this week, that the pattern to ensure that your data is secure, that your users' data is secure, I should say, is to start with a database that is completely not accessible from the internet. Really, in security rules, that's if false. Like nobody can access it. Then you start coding your first use case. And when you run that first use case, guess what? You're going to get permission denied. And that's good, right? Because that means that your database is secure, right? Now you go to the security rules and you make the change that allows only that code to work. So all other codes still should fail, but you change your security rules to allow only that code. And keep in mind, your security rules go hand in hand with your front-end source code. The security rules are essentially your back-end source code. So now you run the app again, right? And guess what? That one use case works. So you go to the second use case. You implement your front-end Flutter code. You run it, and guess what? You get permission denied. And so you again make the change to your security rules to only allow that extra use case. So, right? If you do this, you'll never have any data leak. And this is called the principle of minimal privilege, right? So only the least. It essentially means that there's never any data that can be accessed that should not be accessible. Minimal privilege. And if you follow this pattern, you're never going to be in the news as a lot of big companies were earlier this week because they had a lot of user data accessible in their database. And the thing to keep in mind there, it's like we allow you to connect it to the internet, but that comes with a responsibility. If you don't like that responsibility, don't use a database that can be connected straight to the internet, right? Like I can't make it any clearer than that. This is the biggest one we see. There's like the whole security checklist has tons of other things there, right? It's making sure that your API keys can't be abused. Honestly, there's a lot there. But this is the biggest one that we see regularly. It's about every 12 months, a security report shows up of websites that are unprotected. Every time it hurts, every time it takes me a lot of time to both internally and externally like educate people about this. But it's the cost that we get for allowing you to build an app that directly talks to a cloud-hosted database, right? It's like I always internally also tell people, it's like, this is the business we're in, right? And we need to help developers, right, protect their database. So this too is the type of question where people can try to help, but you will have to treat your backend security rules in the same way you treat your front-end source code. They are an integral part of your application business logic. And so you need to make sure that you write them and check them for security holes from day one and until, well, whenever your app is live. So, great.
Well, that's a great advice. Because security should be the #1 priority if you are dealing with users' data.
Yeah, and so, some of the biggest Firebase app, right, have had this. It's not uncommon, and I get it, right? You're building feature by feature by feature. You want to launch, right? When I was doing a talk at a conference, I've been struggling to get my security rules finished on time before I walked on stage, right? It's like, ooh, that's not ideal. But don't, right? Even if you're slightly late, remember when your app goes viral, lots of eyeballs are going to be there and they want access to your user data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So let's move to the another question, I guess. I would select 9th question, odd number again.
Totally fine.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to Flutter developers learning Firebase to build effective apps? Probably you have already shared a lot, but if there is any, we would like to hear.
No, Flutter developers are in that sense. I help developers on a lot of platforms. I happen to know Flutter really well, but I'm a polyglot. I speak lots of languages, essentially. A programming language. I only speak two other normal languages fluently. But it's don't be afraid to try things, I should say. And I see that more on other platforms than on Flutter developers. Most Flutter developers are pretty good at actually just trying stuff. But on some other platforms, it's more common that people want to understand everything about the technology before they start using it, which is okay. But it means that something like a Masterclass can help you. But in a Q&A type format, I cannot. It's very inefficient to teach people things, right? I can help troubleshoot. That's where something like an online site like Stack Overflow or Slack is really useful, but it's not a great teaching platform. I can see people who want to know everything, right? So on Stack Overflow, I see that they post a question, I have an answer, that's the answer they wanted. 5 minutes later, there's the next question, right? It's just a stream of questions where they're learning the platform. Like, it's not a very efficient use of my time, right? It's like, I really just read the documentation from front to back if you want. You don't have to. I recommend not being afraid to try stuff, especially on a platform like Firebase, where you can get started with everything for free, right? Create a project, don't put it on a paid plan, just keep it on the free plan. That means that you can never be charged a dime. Also means you can't use cloud functions, but right, that's the only product that you can't use there, right? And just start playing with it, right? What's the worst you can do? Right? As long as you're still playing, right? Like, wipe your database? Who cares, right? It was just your own testing data, just you're playing with. And that's how I learned, for example, right? We have new features coming out. I immediately start trying them out in something like, used to be Dartpad. Nowadays, I do Zep.run or Project IDX, right? Or in a Stack Blitz page for web, right? And I start playing with these APIs. And yeah, that's how you learn best how to use them. And essentially, that's how I help developers, right? If they have a question about something, and I don't know the API yet, quite often you'll see me set up my own minimal reproduction of it in a tool like IDX or Zep.run, where I just try the thing and then I share the link with them, right? And I get that not everyone can easily do that, but it's a great learning tool.
Yeah. So technology, I guess that for the technology, this is the right way. If you want to learn, then you have to be curious and you should play around with the things. So
Yep.
yeah, let's move to the last question now. I guess we'll move to the last question. Do we have? Yeah, we can pick. Yeah, this is also amazing question. Where we can basically find the resources, tutorials, and communities to learn about Firebase and to stay updated.
Great question indeed. Your one starting point for learning about Firebase is, of course, firebase.google.com. That's the main website, and where you can get started. I honestly recommend our documentation is really quite good. It's just also really extensive, right? So if you're more of the learning by doing type, then take one of the code labs. We have a few of those. We actually have quite a few of those. But also find third-party tutorials. By now, right, Firebase is a mature platform. There's a ton of third-party content, like the Hey Flutter content, right? And there's many of these. So, right, people often ask me, it's like, what tutorial do you recommend? It's like, how about typing it in your favorite search engine and just seeing what the top result is? Because probably it's not a bad one, because it wouldn't be a top result otherwise, right? And so that's one way to do it. And then I see communities. And for communities, I always recommend the Google Developer Group Network, where there's also lots of Flutter groups, of course, around the world, the Flutter communities. And just find your regional community and go hang out with them, right? Whether it's in person or online. I hope we're back to in person in many places, right? But and learn from them. I know that that's where I meet a lot of developers, right? I travel around the world, and when I can, I try to join the local meetups also, not just the bigger conferences, but also the smaller groups, because it's just where you learn so much more from what people are actually working on and what people are excited about. So there's no better way to learn about new technology than to be together with fellow, I think I can say geeks, fellow geeks, right? And just geeking out about it, just having fun. So always recommend doing that. So let's see, resources, tutorials, communities. I think I covered all three.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I guess we are done with the questions. Do you have anything to maybe announce, just to tell for the community?
No, well, we are definitely working hard on new things at Firebase. So conference season is starting, as I often say, but keep in mind, conference season starts about every quarter, I think. But for me, the big two upcoming events are Google Cloud Next, which is early April in Las Vegas here, where we are going to be launching lots of new Firebase features and even some completely new products. And then the next one is Google I/O, which is probably the more famous one amongst the group we have here. And Google I/O is in Mountain View, and I'm going to be speaking at both of these. It's my first time. Well, I've spoken at Google I/O before, but not for a few years. So it's my first time in a while. And I'm going to be co-hosting the What's New in Firebase. So I know all the releases that are coming in there, and there's so much cool stuff coming there. So join us online, or if you're there in person, of course, come find me in my yellow shirt, and we can geek out together.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, I guess that's the end of the this session. So yeah, thank you so much, Frank, and all the people who are watching this live stream. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.